I'm so amazed that you have 6 books, and it's totally exciting.
I know, thank you. I'm very excited. I'm excited about this one because it's called What She Wants. So it's really, it wraps it all up for me. This is the final book. It just spells it out. You know, we've known each other a long time now, but what brought us together is that we had the same first poetry teacher ever, the same professor, Thomas Lux.
My mother took another job that better suited her soft and sonorous voice. She was the one, when you picked up the phone, who said, "Number, please."
I had him as a freshman. It was the first class he ever taught. And then you got him 10 years later.
As a freshman, or as he sometimes liked to call us, his freshman dummies.
Freshman dummies, yeah. And he called us both fruitcake.
And fruitcake, monkey tree.
Which now he'd get fired.
Bird bath.
Do you still hear his voice in your head when you're writing a poem?
I do, which is to say that his influence is not necessarily that we as students wanted to write like him, but he was such a powerful influence because he immediately got to the heart of things. And he cut out the cliches. He taught us about line and caesuras. And he fed us the greats at the beginning, which is what we needed.
And I think for me, and I'm sure for you too, he began the obsession.
Yes.
You know, the obsessiveness of writing and reading, and that was always the high point of every day, was thinking of something to write. But he definitely started the fire that for both of us has never gone out.
Yeah, and I think that the fire is something that even if you're not an artist, you're carrying inside of you, which relates to your book, What She Wants, and longing and desire and these things that drive us in our lives toward or away from choices that we make.
And the thing that inspired me and also scared me a little as a 17-year-old at Emerson College was the passion that he felt for poetry that was sometimes scary. I mean, you know, I'll never forget him throwing books across the room because there was a cliche in it. And I think that was, you'd never have that today. But that drama, and it was about the written word, it was about a stanza or it was about a line break that instilled that in me. So now when I look at my own work, sometimes I'm a much harder critic because I think, oh, he would say, get rid of that. And sometimes I fight against, I mean, this happens with all of us in workshops. You hear other people's voices in your head. But the passion that he created at the beginning for us has, I think, has always lasted.
The passion and the longing and all of those things is definitely part of our identity, and so is our work. I was an athlete when I was young. I was a top athlete and I won 1 million awards. And then I chose Sarah Lawrence because I wanted to be a writer. That never went away from the time I discovered what poetry, or what I thought poetry was. And I think for you too, you said it's like you walked away from it and then you came back to it?
Right, it was always there. Something was definitely missing. I thought I could walk away from it.
Right.
Because life takes over and things happen, and I wasn't an academic. I didn't teach. I didn't go into that world. I started a business, had a family, and you know, but there was always something missing. It was like a child that I needed to recover or find again. And Tom helped me to recover it years later. So he came back again. Anyway, I think it's interesting that the two of us met through him, because he said to me when I moved to LA, you know, he said, there's one person you have to look up. She's the real thing. And it was Elena Karina Byrne. That's what he said.
He was like my brother. He also taught us how to individualize our voices, but also to be independent of him. But you're right, he embodied that passion and that poetry. I mean, he lived and breathed it. And,
he did.
And I think we all want that in our lives. We want something that we can carry with ourselves, whether it's out loud or secretly.
and something that will never go away, something that's with us no matter what.
No matter what.
And I don't know if he gave that to us, but he certainly jump-started it. I mean, it might have happened eventually, but he also made it a good thing, made it the right thing to do. And for me personally, I'll just say he loved the humor that I had in my poetry. And, you know, we always think poems are not supposed to be funny and the good ones are serious. And he cracked up. To watch him cracking up at a poem. And even, I mean, his own poems always have humor in them.
A lot of humor. He also taught us how to move from the ordinary to the extraordinary.
Yeah.
And even in his funny poems, he did that. He moved from something that might seem mundane, you know, like a refrigerator.
Yes.
And then suddenly as he said, your heart is ripped with joy. He was able to really take those turns. And I think that's also the key. You know, it's that element of surprise, and you have that in your work.
So much of the surprise that's in a good poem is a surprise to you. You're not planning it when you're writing, like,
No.
Where's the surprise?
No.
But when the surprise hits, that's the great joy. It's the great joy. And so, you know, even this book, which is What She Wants, but it's poems on obsession, and we've talked about it. I fell in love with this word called limerence, which no one had ever heard of, really. I read it somewhere, and limerence is obsessive love, and it's actually a psychological condition where you think that someone loves you and they really don't, but everything they say or do you read into and you think that's it, and it's really kind of funny but horrifying.
Yeah.
So my book is based on the different stages of limerence. The 4 stages of limerence are infatuation, crystallization, when you really think it's crystallizing. So there's a lot of poems about that moment, which is probably the most exciting. Deterioration and ecstatic release. Now, I didn't make those 4 things up. Those are the 4 different categories of limerence. So how could you not put a book together in those categories?
Right, right.
So,
fantastic.
So unruly aura is the crystallization part. The cashier at the health food store tells me I have a beautiful aura. Wait, I tell her. If you want to see a really beautiful aura, wait until I've taken my Renew Life Ultimate Flora probiotic. After that, my aura will knock your socks off. She smiles at me and rings me up. My money has a beautiful aura, too. My dollar bills float out of my pink wallet. The man behind me swells from the heat I generate. Each step I take brings me closer to God, the final, fabulous aura. Take my hand, I tell her. Squeeze my aura. It's hungry and looking for someone to devour. It's a little humor.
Yes.
A lot of the poems in this book are not funny at all, which is very hard for me to deal with because I like funny.
I know. Although they have an energy that is like levity. It's just an energy. Your poems never get too heavy that way. It's like physically they move with a certain element of liveliness.
But we've discussed that so many of our poems are about longing and desire. And
longing and desire, and I think that longing and grief are great bedfellows because you do talk about loss as well.
And I think for me anyway, and it's in a lot of these poems, longing is a real driving force. Mm-hmm. It's not necessarily a sad thing, and that's part of what's in this book.
No.
There's a joy about longing because if you don't have longing, you don't care.
Right.
And so it doesn't have to be sad. So I mean, I'm sure hundreds of people have written a poem called Longing, but you and I have each written a poem called Longing.
I think we should read those.
Yeah, I think it'd be interesting.
All right.
So.
Longing. more blindfold than blame. Take what it means to memorize the path one domestic airplane makes, falling out of the sky without ever landing on the sundial. Take the bad apple that bit a bullet more than once and the full tin bucket weight of ice water spilling inside each lung, then down into your stomach just before and just after sleep when you believe he's still there. Plumb him in your mouth, his hand tangled in the cat's cradle of your bedded hair. Like every first snow, longing returns its cheap trick that says you'll live forever. More gnaw and recede than wade and future. All love and loss tending their prolonged ricochet reminders. Take this existential curse of 1,000 kisses, their pirate taste in exchange for your sanity. Such sorrow set to music and heard under the windows, a feathered sound, nothing like a baby bird that your mother saved. Only warning at each turn an underwater love feeling that you're free, but you're not, are you? This bellyache has nothing to do with your imagination or what you knew then and what you know now. Longing curses logic for a reason and claims a wailing right to take you out for a long walk off the grassy cliff. No one human escapes this drowning world, neck high in longing. It's just another religion after all. The body battle, daybed devotion that confounds the litter layer of forest floor with your wishing bones.
That's a gorgeous poem.
Thank you.
And, you know, our work is so very different. And it'll be interesting because I have a poem called Longing, which is a whole other feel to it. But there's a lot of surrealism in your poems still. I'm sure that's a leftover from, but the imagery is gorgeous and every line is gorgeous. So, and it's more about the gut-wrenching feel of longing. I'll read this just to show how different this particular longing is. Longing. I saw Amour last night, French film, about an old couple, life, death, and everything in between. Bring tissues, said a review. But no tears came. I still wonder this morning, why didn't I cry? What's wrong with me? I hear the birds singing outside my window, trapeze artists twirling their tiny bodies from one branch to the next. Pigeons are heavy, seem stupid, clueless. Not like these air magicians on my lemon tree. A pigeon was in the movie, flew in from the balcony onto the kitchen floor, walked around pecking crumbs off the tiles. The old man captured it in a blanket, held it on his lap. This upset me more than you can know. My therapist has the sounds of chirping birds piped into his waiting room. For the first few sessions, I thought the birds were real, comforted knowing sparrows were perched close by, while I waited to be engorged with self-understanding. When I found out the birds were fake, the whole idea of therapy lost its charm. But I tried to rationalize, isn't it the same as when they play a recording of ocean waves during a massage? After all, the sounds are real. They've just been captured, saved for moments we crave their music. Like longing, the stab of desire is real. So we place it in a blanket, hold it in our laps, feel its pulse throb in our fingertips as a flood of memories carries us into another body.
Yay. So there's that marvelous associative leap, starting point with the film, moving to the birds, and then, finally or eventually landing on the internal thinking of the speaker, which is to address longing.
I didn't know it was going to come in this poem. I seriously was told, you know how people say, you've got to see this movie, bring tissues, this is so great. It's, the caption was, it's about life, death, and everything in between. And you're ready for that.
Yeah.
You want to cry. You want to enjoy something like that. And the poem the movie just left me, I was disappointed that I didn't have that sadness that I wanted to conjure up. So the poem was sort of like about being mad at seeing a movie that didn't do what it was supposed to do. But we're the journey, as you call it. And for me, a lot of my poems, they're all very narrative. They tell a story, and they do go down the steps that eventually lead to my gut. Sort of like,
right.
And I also was mad. I saw this one therapist for a short period of time because he had fake birds chirping. And when I found out they were fake, I thought this whole thing is bad. And so there was this, again, I didn't know that was going to come up in the poem.
Yeah, yeah.
And then I think just back to the idea of writing and how we write, it's then you're left with the choices of what to keep in the poem. So you're longing, there's so much going on. There's so many choices you could make. Mine is more narrative. It tells a story. But what do you want to keep in? What do you want to take out?
If you're writing a lyrical poem rather than a narrative poem, but even with a narrative poem, it can give you those moments where you know associatively where to go. Like, for example, if you're in a room, you don't want to suddenly be outside, although you can do anything in a poem, right? Or you talk about time, you might as well, try to tether those time frames together.
So what you're saying, again, reminds me of a Thomas Lux thing, where there would be something in a poem, and he'd say at the end, what is a squirrel doing in that poem? Why do you have... a headband in that poem or whatever. And you're thinking, well, I thought it worked. But see, other people can hear that's taking you away from whatever you're trying to do.
Right.
And this is part of the puzzle. Like in 5 or 6 or 10 lines, there's so much to pack and unpack and listen to and understand and take out or add to. And,
Well, there's an amazing variety in your book I think stylistically, and I love that, appreciate that. And although I read this poem Longing, which is more like my older lyrical poems, I've been working very hard since I've studied screenwriting and got my MFA in screenwriting. I've been working very hard on creating at least a narrative through line. Even with the lyrical, but I think that those acts of discovery, they can take on different forms, but you have so much, as I said, variety in this. Even though I would probably be able to still hear Kim in the poems.
I don't want you to hear Kim in the poems. No Kim.
The speaker.
The speaker, right. So that's another thing we were going to talk about, how much of our work is autobiographical, how much of it
that's good.
just comes through us and we don't know where. But I think that for me, this particular book is more, what do we say, taking more chances than other books? Or
Tom's one of his favorite words, taking a risk.
Taking a risk. This book takes a risk. And the poems are not necessarily autobiographical, but they are definitely filled with elements. Listen, we write what we've lived, what we know, what we've heard, what we've they don't.
And personas, and another thing that Tom said, he said that a poem, once you write it, no longer belongs to you. And
that's right.
And especially good advice for younger students. But I feel that all poems also have an element of persona in them, because especially once you've been writing for a while, you become selfish because you know that the poem wants something and you're letting it take it. You're holding the leash and it's pulling you along.
Okay, speaking of leash, I'm going to read this poem. It's the first poem in the book.
Okay.
It's short, and it's something I want to also talk about this.
Okay.
But so this poem, a lot of my poems, the first line is the title. So the title of this poem is "She'll Do Anything for Food." And it's the first poem in the book because it sort of lays out obsessive love and compulsion, and it doesn't matter if you want it, you want it. So she'll do anything for food, the dog walker tells me. She speaks quietly, not wanting to insult her heavy-boned, one blue, one brown-eyed beast tugging at her leash. We did a doggy ancestor test, she confides. Discovered she's part wolf, part miniature poodle. Must be the poodle part makes her so ravenous. Small creatures are ruthless feeders. Think of enraptured rats gnawing their way through orange trees, babies nursing, sucking so fiercely they can burst a nipple. Think of your heart, size of a throbbing fist, that part of you that will do anything for love.
Yeah.
You're talking about my narrative, like what things come into my head. This is something I did want to talk about, that I just literally went for a walk. I went for a walk during the day, and a woman was walking her dog, and the dog jumped on me, and the woman apologetically said, she'll do anything for food. And I thought, thank you. You know, that's all I needed. Right. She'll do anything for food. And she did tell me she had a dog eat test. So, I mean, a lot of the things are real, but they're also just beautiful food for writing a poem. Like people say, you know, how did you come up with that idea? Or what prompts do you use? And I always say, when I'm teaching, listen to what people are saying to you. I mean, our job as poets, I think, is to report what we see and what we hear in a way that's different.
You know, Richard Hugo in his book, Triggering Town, says that's the trigger, talks about triggering, and I think that's so true. My second book, Mask, every single poem was written because of the epigraph. Epigraph inspired the poem, so might as well have been something I heard.
I listen to conversations all the time, and I write them. I write down what people are saying because you wouldn't even believe it. And
no.
And just going back to Tom, you know, in God knows 1970 whatever, I used to watch reruns during the day in college in Boston. It was so cold, and I'd go back to my little apartment and I would watch reruns of The Big Valley, which was an old TV show. Older than most people will remember. And there was a character, and he wrote, and I'll never forget, but he said, he had a line, Leon purely admires a fine handgun. And I thought, Leon purely admires a fine handgun? And I wrote it down.
It's almost oxymoronic.
I mean, it was just incredible. and I wrote it in a poem, and I brought it into Tom's class. And he was like, where'd you come up with that? Leon purely admires a fine handgun. But it was from a TV show.
Fantastic. That's a good title.
Yeah, it is, right?
Yeah,
I mean, I don't know about nowadays, but
I think
it's interesting, isn't it?
I think so.
So there's things that we hear and that we see, and how to extract them and turn them into something different is a part of what I love to do.
So I heard Brendan Constantine, or maybe he wrote it in one of his poems. He said, I don't make the rules. And I know that's a phrase, and I love that. And that, boom, created this Ars Poetica.
Great.
And I'm trying, as you'll see, to be a little more like him. No, I'm kidding.
Don't do that.
I don't make the rules. A noir Ars Poetica. When dusk makes a break for it alone, and after a lie has been told to you so many times, I forget my own name, and a man appears in a tuxedo, opens the glass door to say welcome, welcome, without smiling as he looks over my shoulder. I turn around to look too, since this is a motel and not a restaurant. The parking lot's almost as empty as exhaustion, so I decide to stay and say nothing in case he has a gun and a mind made for all-nighters. I say this to you because the floor smells like old beer and grief. Once he hands me my door key card, I see a rat make himself at home behind the candy dispenser down the hall. Now I wonder what lives behind the ice machine that lights up at night like one blue eye of hell as you lift open its tiny kiln-like door, before reaching in with that small shovel tied to its black watch chain. I will anticipate the smell of cigarette smoke coming through the bathroom vent from the next room after a couple has turned their sprung bed into a comedy store of errors between their separate marriages. This makes it easy to invade their space. Raising the volume on the TV, after all, I'll find nothing worth watching. But for a Dungeon and Dragons cop show where the villain is an orphan who gets bloodied but free in one fell swoop, yet not without the cliché of falling in love with the wrong side of the bed.
You know, when I listen to your poems, they're so beautiful and so involved and so filled with different images and ideas and thoughts. You could literally read the poem 5 times and still not feel like you've gotten it. Mine seem more simple. They're more simpler stories. They're moments. But when I've tried and I have written longer lines that go on, I get scared. You know, it's sort of like the ride at the carnival. The screws come off it, and it's flying in the air.
I love that.
And there's a sense of scariness, and I would like to be able to not be so afraid and just keep going with the poem. I notice just as we're reading these together that mine are much more like compact.
I'm trying to write about singular moments in my childhood, something that happened, whether or not I put in my, because my lyric detours, I think, are an avoidance tactic.
Interesting.
Emotionally.
Now, I've been told, go on. Keep going with that poem.
Right.
And keeping it sort of compact avoids it. So, wow.
But you're like Sylvia Plath. She said a poem is a closed fist that excludes and stuns. And I love that notion, too. You know, we want to be punched in the gut. And we also want to walk away and keep thinking about the what ifs. Oh.
Elena, you know, I love you. I love talking with you. I love reading your work, but we never have really had a chance to do this. And for that, we can thank Poetry.LA finally getting us together.
Thank you. Thank you
to
so
be able
much.
to sit and talk about what we love.
Yeah.
And also, you know, reminisce about our mentor. And, you know, and
who helped us love it even more.
Helped us love it even more.
Yeah.